Are you locked onto these?
Play hard, work hard, play
Work,
hard.
work, work. Exactly. I like this one. It's a good one, Kiki. Wow. Work, work. That's like the dream I have in my head. Someone yelling at me, work, work. Oh, my man. God, this has been a crazy, crazy, crazy busy couple of weeks, right?
It sure has. It's been insane, but it's been fun.
Oh, my God. It's been absolutely crazy. I don't even know what to do with myself. It doesn't sound like it's stopping either. Oh, man.
It's not.
No, it's not. You're the one carrying my schedule. I know, right? So, anyways, yo, folks, welcome to The Word. The Word is your area for sales jolt to get you hip, to get you pumped for sales, entrepreneurs, success, motivation, and all those things that make the world go round. And we do it in a non-boring way. So, welcome, people. Thank you very much. This is episode 20, and today we're going to be talking to a Blake. I can never say his name, so I'm not even going to try. I'm going to let him say it when he comes on because I screw it up every time. But we're going to be talking about millennials today. So this is we're moving a little from our past view, right? Right, Kira?
Yeah, it's a shift. Keep you on your toes.
Are you a millennial?
I am a millennial.
You are?
I am.
Wow. Max is a millennial too. So,
yeah.
So our company we had millennials and Gen X. I think we even had one boomer, actually. She just left. Robbie, if you're listening, we missed you. But yeah, we had one boomer and then a couple Gen X's and a bunch of millennials. So, all right, so I guess this is interesting. I'll learn something about how to manage you guys. But anything we want to, any housekeeping before we jump into our guests and start talking about millennials?
Housekeeping, just remember that if you aren't able to tune in live, you can always catch it on YouTube. It's going to be there forever and always. And now we have a podcast, so if you just don't have time to commit to watching a video, dropping in for a while, you can do it while you're shopping, while you're baking Christmas cookies, holiday cookies, what have you. You can get it done, get your learn on, and also get the rest of everything else we all need to do in December.
Yes, get your learn on. So subscribe to the podcast, please. And also, folks, give us a review on the podcast. Tell us you love it, hate it, 1 star, 5 stars. I don't care. I just want to know how you feel. Drop some comments down here in the YouTube section. If you're watching on YouTube, tell us what you think. Give us a thumbs up, thumbs down. See, I'm straight up. I don't need your love. I just need your feedback, okay? And from that feedback, I'll make you love me. And if you love me, I'll keep making you love us, and we'll just go in that direction. So just give us feedback. That's super important. And if you're listening, Sales Jolt, if you have questions, hashtag Sales Jolt. If you want to share comments, you want to get involved, there's a hashtag Sales Jolt. So I will not waste any more time. Blake, welcome. And my man, tell me how to say your last name. Oh, tell me how to say your last name, Blake.
Cavignac. Don't worry, man. It's a hard one to say.
So it's kind of like cognac, Cavignac. I could say that.
I've done that before, man. That's what others have called me, and oddly enough, I don't drink, but I'll take it. All right, all right. Wow, you don't drink. Look at you. I mean, this guy. Look, the millennial stereotype goes out the window. So just out of the gate, people, one of the things we do with all of our guests is we ask them to fill out a form and share some stuff about them. We ask them for their objectives for the show, and it's about a 2-page thing, right? And we ask them to show up early so we can make sure the mic works, so we make sure everything works. And I'm telling you straight up now, past folks, I'm sorry if you don't like what I have to say, but 90% of the people we ask to do this don't get it done. They show up with 2 minutes to go, and we're all scrambling around. But the millennial, the one who's supposed to not have his shit together, has 3 pages.
Front and back.
Civic Peak. Yes. 3 pages of information that we asked for. His ass was here before I was. So, people, clearly the millennial stereotype does not hold true. So, welcome, Blake Cavignac. Thanks for being here, my man.
No,
yes.
man.
Tell us who you are. Give us the background.
I can't take credit for that, man. I've been very lucky to have 2 great parents. So they taught me well. I can't take any credit nor deserve the credit for being on time and doing what I'm supposed to do.
Oh, he's humble on top of it all. Look, let me break down parents and children for you, okay? Let me break this down. Parents can teach the children absorb, and apply. If you chose not to absorb or apply, that is not your parents' fault. So you got to take some credit for actually adhering to their lessons. Yes?
True, but I'm also hopefully smart enough to realize I don't deserve a lot of the credit. So I get you though, but a big part of that comes from the parents and setting the example. They can tell you to do things, but ultimately it's their actions, and their actions always backed up their words. So.
That's truth. That's truth. Interesting. So we'll see what kind of potty mouth my kids have, because I swear all the time. And I swear in front of them, and so far, no parent has ever said, boy, your kid has a potty mouth. So I don't know, maybe it's reverse engineering, right? They hear me do it like, I don't want to sound like my dad.
No, I hear you, man. I also want to let you know, I kind of shared this with you in the beginning of the show. Want to let you know how much I appreciate what you do. I mean, as mentioned, we talked about this idea of being true to who you are yourself, and I think from all the people I've studied, at least thus far in my career, now being 28, I mean, you're leaps and bounds beyond anyone I've seen in terms of staying original to who you are, and I think that goes a long way, and it's taught me a lot. So, I mean, before we even get into it, I think you just got to know the impact you made in my life in terms of being that role model for me. So thank you, Keenan.
Wow. Hey, thank you. Thank you very much, my man. For our listeners and viewers, I have never met Blake in person. I did not pay him $100 to say that, and I do not owe him money. So that was straight up authentic. Thank you, my man. I really appreciate that. I try. I try. I've been like this most of my life, and it's created benefits, and it's also created hassles, and I just chose to move into a space where it created me less hassles, and that's working for myself. So, all right, look, we're going to talk about millennials today. So I wanted you on the show because you started a company, which I'd like you, or an organization, like I'd like you to tell people about, that helps companies and helps millennials come together, that sort of really focuses on this whole idea of millennials. So this is what this whole show is going to be about. So people take note. If you don't give a shit about millennials, then listen anyways, but this is what the whole show is going to be about. Tell us about YoungPro Elite, who you are, why you got started, and why it matters.
So what we do with YoungPro Elite is the focus is on developing, I don't know if you want to call it the next generation of leaders, but giving young professionals, recent college graduates, the tools that they need to succeed in their careers. Look, I went to business school. I went through all the business classes. A lot of stuff I was being taught didn't apply, especially early on in my career. And I think if you look at the fact that we spend the majority of our lives working, you got to find a way to enjoy what you do, because if you don't, it negatively impacts every area of your life. And so this idea, this concept really came from that pain point of how do you get young professionals together to help each other, to advance each other's careers? Then how do you get organizations? How do you get baby boomers? Because a big issue in today's workplace are the baby boomers who are retiring, the perpetuation of their organization. How do you attract, how do you develop, how do you retain the young talent so that you have a successful perpetuation? And so we fuse those two ideas into one, where really what we do, we go to an agency and we partner with them. What they then do is they have their young professionals go out into their markets to recruit other young professionals who have a higher standard for their careers. They then come together once a month for peer group interaction, professional development training. We've developed an entire program to take them through what that coursework, what that program really looks like.
So what's the charter or the objective or goal of YoungPro Elite?
The objective is twofold. One, it's to help our partners build a brand in their marketplace that's seen as an innovative company that is invested in the future success of young professionals in their community. Two is for the young professionals in that chapter to go through the program, when they graduate through the program, to have the necessary skills that they can apply in any aspect of their career, so that they proactively create a career that's fulfilling, but also adds value to the organizations, to the companies they work for.
Okay. Why did you think this was needed? Why was this needed?
For me, it comes down to a frustration. This whole idea of following your passion, in my point of view, is a faulty strategy on how to go about approaching your career. I think it's one of the reasons why you see so many young professionals today jumping from job to job. You know, it's that hope of, once I find my passion or once I follow it, everything's going to click. I'm not going to have any challenges. I'm going to overcome all the obstacles I face. My career is going to be perfect. Everything's going to go my way. You know, from my experience, I tried that. I jumped from job to job, just led to frustration. What I learned is, and this is a much more disciplined approach, you got to find something you have somewhat of an interest in. You then have to identify the skills, the talents, behaviors that you need to consistently develop on a day-by-day basis, deliberately practice skills.
We lost you for a second, so let's see what you found. We lost you. We got you now, but we lost the audio. So what you said is what I found was.
So what I found was I take a different approach, and that's what's helped me grow YoungPro Elite to what it is today in really under a year and a half, is you identify something you have an interest in. It doesn't have to be your one true passion, just something you're interested in. You then identify the skills, the talents, the behaviors that you need to deliberately practice each day in order to become one of the best at what you do. And then you practice those on a consistent basis. Because what I found from my experience, when you get better at something, when you consistently practice, you start to develop that passion. And over time, when you consistently practice, you get better at what you do. When you get better at what you do, you enjoy it more, you practice it more, you produce at higher levels. And so it's a much more methodical approach. So this idea, the coursework of YoungPro Elite, is really focused around that concept, that strategy. But also, more importantly, as you can probably relate to this, you surround yourself with people who hold themselves to a higher standard. So that makes you raise your game as well. Because if you're hanging around with people who just have no interest in accelerating their careers, you're likely going to fall down to their level. And so it's twofold. It's giving them the tools, the resources, but it's also putting them with the right people who are going to be there throughout their career.
Okay. So why is this a millennial issue, right? I mean, why is this about millennials? Well, granted, millennials are younger, but what makes millennials so special that they need this, that they're bouncing around from job to job and they can't find their space? Why is that? What is it special about millennials?
You could say there's a lot special about them. I don't know if they are special. For me, I am a millennial. You know, I'm 28 years old, and so the idea for me of working with my peers and having them lead their own chapters, because I'm not really a face guy. I don't like to be out front and do a lot of the. I don't want the attention on me, so to speak. Now, granted, I know I'm a business owner. I've got to have that at some level. But with the millennials, why are they special? Why is it for them? Well, they're the future. I mean, if we look at the United States and where we're going, they're going to determine the next 20, 30 years. And I don't think there's anything more important than developing today's young talent, because ultimately that's going to impact not only what happens in the future, but how that young talent then leads, you know, the next generation and the generation after that. And so in my point of view, I think developing young professionals is one of the most important things that we can do.
Okay, I'll agree with that. I'll completely agree with that. Yes, Kiki.
I just also, as a millennial, I think we're more of a collaborative generation, and I've never done anything career focused, and I definitely would be interested in something like that. But I've been a part of discussion groups and just like making changes in your life and just hearing that, being inspired by others, being motivated by others. I'm very competitive. I want to be the best in the group. So, I mean, I think that is kind of a common thread amongst a lot of millennials.
Yeah, you know, Kiki, you bring up a good point. One of the things that a lot of our members come to realize is that when they come to these chapter meetings, a lot of it is very intimate. So you have 15, 20 people per chapter. It's invite only. When we have our young professionals, millennials, sharing their experiences, all the they're going through, sorry to cuss, but just a lot of the stuff they're going through, they say, wow, I'm not the only person who is dealing with all this stuff going on in my life right now. I have peers who are struggling, and so that creates an entirely new standard in terms of knowing others are going to be there to support you and having that collaboration as well.
So let's talk about the millennial, okay? There are stereotypes and there's realities. Define or describe today's millennial.
This is where I struggle, Keenan. I mean, you kind of opened it up by saying I was on time, I did what I was supposed to do, and you had some boomers or Gen Xers who maybe didn't. And so for me to classify 70, 80, 90 million people, the millennial generation, all being the same, is kind of a pet peeve of mine. You know,
okay, talk about that.
Relate, you know, X or Boomer, you know some who are disciplined, but you also know some who are lazy. And that's why I think a lot of the Boomers, a lot of the Xers who are leaders right now in the marketplace, it's the ones who have these stereotypes that millennials are a certain way that negatively impact or get negatively impacted the most, because people become who you want them to become, right?
Okay, so take this moment to talk about what the stereotypes are, and then talk about who they are, who you think they are. Because here's the interesting piece. You yourself said they need certain things. One of the things you talk about is the six needs that young pros have, right? So that speaks to a certain identity. Mm-hmm. So, you know, so I want to kind of put you in a little corner and say, okay, you could say here's a stereotype and I call it bullshit, but you yourself even do pigeonhole or classify young pros as a group themselves. So why don't you talk about what you think they truly are versus what the stereotype is?
Okay, so here's my perspective on that, because I don't necessarily put them into a stereotype as being entitled. You know, if you want to address some of the stereotypes of today's millennials, you know, you have entitled, you'll have lazy, you'll have disloyal, only looking out for their best interest, which I guess is disloyal because they're doing what's best for them. In terms of the actual 6 needs we talked about, I see those as being human needs. If you look at any Boomer, Gen X, or Millennial, the 6 needs you're talking about in the, and I could do a screen share. I don't know, I created kind of like a resource guide for you.
Button on the left.
Can you see it?
Yep.
So I'll put together this resource guide just for the words so you can see when we're talking about the 6 needs, here's really what we're getting into. You have clarity, connection, growth, contribution, and significance. And kind of as we discussed, Keenan, if I take this down, Kiki, is that okay?
Yeah.
I don't know what the viewers are seeing on the screen.
No, we were seeing your chart. And yes, and now we're seeing us.
End screen share if you want us to see you.
Okay, perfect. I'll stop sharing. So really, Keenan, what the focus of that is giving the CEOs, the executives, the tools that they need when developing their young talent. So in other words, those are the 6 needs that regardless of whatever development program they have, whether it's internal or external, they need to meet, because ultimately when you help young professionals experience those needs that I just put up on the screen, that is proving to help those leaders, those organizations attract, develop, retain today's young professionals.
Okay. So the idea of, you know, it's interesting. As a brother, I get the concept of stereotypes. As a woman and an Asian, I'm sure you do, Kiki, the idea of stereotypes. But there is a difference between stereotypes and negative stereotypes and unique differences. And I think sometimes too many people either try to lump them all together, and that screws the whole thing up, or deny, the flip side is deny that there are unique differences and not stereotypes, right? And so they don't want to classify. They don't want to classify for fear of stereotyping. So I'm going to keep leaning on you here, Blake. What makes millennials different? What is their unique differences that will then drive their needs? Because whether you recognize it or not, you created this program because you recognize that there are things young people need that other people don't need. Mm-hmm. So clearly that's driven by some classification, right? So let's talk, because I want our listeners to understand that and be able to differentiate between stereotype and legitimate need.
That's fair. That's fair, and I appreciate you pushing. So
that's what I do, baby.
That's how you get results, right? You know, one that comes to mind immediately is less of the lone wolf mentality. I have to try to figure it out by myself. That's a big reason why we created YoungPro Elite. It's more of the collaborative approach. You know, we're stronger as a group. We can all get to higher levels in our career and make a bigger impact together as opposed to doing it by ourselves. And I think that if you look at the initial success of what we built is a huge driver of that. So if there's one that is a stereotype that makes that's more in alignment with a millennial. I think it's more a collaborative approach. So that be one. Is that where you're trying to get at, Keenan, in terms of like direction?
Yes, actually, I wrote a question down here that I want to ask you, and you're doing it. I want to know the difference between the hype and the right. Right? The hype is a stereotype. The right is the actual uniqueness that's different about millennials. Because look, I don't want the show to go too far into this, but I think there are some real childhood development or childhood environmental issues that create a different group of people. Mm-hmm. Not different like Mars is different, but when you talk about this lone wolf thing, I can't help but ask or wonder if this whole collaborative thing comes from the fact that younger kids today, were never asked to actually be responsible for jack shit until they turned about 21. So this idea that I have to go figure out something for myself is completely foreign. Yep. So if you put me in a box forever and then threw me into the street, if I had someone next to me who just come out of the box, I'm going to work with him and try to figure it out because I don't know what the hell I'm doing. Mm-hmm. If I had to do stuff my whole life and then you threw me in the street, like, I know what I'm doing. I got it. I can go. So I have to wonder if that's part of the uniqueness of these kids and the lack of. I'll stop there. So are we heading in the right direction? Yeah, I'm not one. You have those researchers out there that will look at like childhood development and things like that. Quite frankly, I don't have the patience to take time to really research. I just go based off experiences, right? Real world experiences, what we're building. And being a millennial myself, there was always more of that, and maybe it's because I played sports, but there's always more of that concept of team. And then when you get into school, when you go to college, what I noticed is that there's much more of an emphasis on these group projects, things like that. And so maybe you could make the connection there. But again, I'm not some researcher that can go back 15, 20 years in terms of saying, here's why it is the way. I just think when you look at the internet, and the internet's a perfect example. When you look at people collaborating, providing reviews on past experiences, it's almost like we trust our intuition to some level, but we also know that we trust our peers in their judgment, their feedback, in order to make a decision. And so if we know that we can make a better decision by weighing all the options, we're going to collaborate, we're going to work with others to come to that conclusion. Where you look at a boomer or Gen X, maybe they didn't grow up with the online environment, the ability to go out and ask others what their thoughts were, so they've maybe been conditioned that way. I don't know if that's the case, but that's my. So I'm a Gen Xer. I was born in '68, right? We had collaborate. Now look, we're all talking from our own microcosms of the world, but yep. Those memes that go around that show little kids riding big wheels going over jumps, right, and say if you didn't have to wear a helmet, if you were out until dark, that's true. Like, there wasn't a small group of people in the world who made that up. When I was a kid, and all my friends, who some are listening to and are on Facebook, it was the God's honest truth. Come home when the street light comes on. Come home at dusk. And so what we were all doing is we were out in the streets, who knows where, building forts, building jumps when we're sledding on the snow, doing lemonade stands with no parental guidance at all, and we had to learn to collaborate there as well. Mm-hmm. We had to build shit, create shit, right? Because if you weren't creating as a kid, and when we were younger, you had nothing to do. Like, the whole idea was creating games. I mean, all these games we made up that kids don't make up anymore. We had to make up a game. We got tired of playing hide and seek, so come up with a new game. Let's create this game, and we just build a fort. And we're done with the fort. Like, well, that's boring. Let's go build something. Like, you constantly had to be building stuff. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. So we had a collaborative environment too, but you actually had to produce out of that collaborative environment. Mm-hmm. I don't know if kids at your age, millennials had to produce. I don't know, Kiki, Blake, do you guys have to produce as kids?
I did stuff like that. I don't know about you, Blake. I'm 2 years older than you, but I mean, I mean, I don't know. I didn't really watch the news as a kid, but I don't think that there was as much fear-mongering about letting your kids out. There was definitely not the lawsuits happening because you did let your kids out. So I was able to do that. I think today it kind of is a concern, more with like, I mean, I hadn't even thought about that element, but just especially with childhood obesity, just being just like hunkered in your house because you're not allowed to go outside because your parents are both working. like, I think that can be a negative. It can also be a positive. Like, maybe they're writing code. Maybe they're developing their own apps and games. Like, I've heard of kids that are doing this. There's toys that are training kids to learn how to code. Who knows what the future holds? I find it hard to believe that any generation will just, like, shut down on creating.
Blake?
I mean, we all have our own differences. You mentioned the idea of you collaborating in a different way, maybe more in a social way, physical presence way, I should say, because it can be very social online. Ultimately, I think you bring up a good point, though, where it comes down to your ability to just figure stuff out. You didn't necessarily have the internet to rely on. You had to rely on your instincts, your intuition. And I think in many ways that kind of creates, I mean, it's how you build your business, right? Like, if you weren't born or raised that way, it's likely that you're not going to be in the position you're at today because you had to figure stuff out, and that's who you are, Now, that can't be said for the majority of other people, but I think in many ways that's how you were conditioned.
Okay. All right, so this show is not about the childhood, although everybody likes to talk about that, millennials and Gen X's, et cetera. So let's shift it a little. And you said something that I thought was interesting. You said that millennials are the most important asset of a company. Why do you feel that way? And what is it that millennials bring to the table that other groups don't?
I feel that way for a couple reasons. One is I feel like most organizations, agencies today are struggling to either attract or retain young talent. Now, even if they attract young talent, the amount of time, energy, and effort they put into developing that young talent to have them leave after a period of 2 to 3 years is a huge loss. I was talking to an agency owner the other day, insurance brokerage, and he told me that if he hires a young producer, that young producer leaves his agency in 2 to 3 years, that's a $200,000 loss for his organization. And so when you see young professionals jumping from job to job at the rate that they are, that is a lot of revenue that goes out the door from these companies. So I say it's a company's most important asset, one, because if you do not know how to retain the young talent you attract, it's going to impact the future of that organization, which leads me to the second point, perpetuation. I think there's a stat, let me see it, said that 63% of U.S. executives will be eligible to retire in the next 5 years. So that is from PricewaterhouseCoopers. And so when you look at companies whose baby boomers are going to be retiring, well, if you have entrepreneurs, if you have owners, their main concern right now is perpetuation. Who's going to take over their company? Who's going to buy out their company? And you have to look at the millennials. You have to look at their young talent, and if they don't have the right talent in their organization, then everything that those boomers have built up over the years who knows what could happen. But it's not going to turn out.
What about Gen Xers? What about me? People like me, we got a group in between boomers and millennials. What about us Gen Xers? What's a Gen Y? What's Gen Y? This is the one now. No, what's Gen Y? How old's Gen Y?
The Gen Y is like what? You have, it's like the top is like 34, 35, somewhere around there.
Is that a Gen Y?
Gen Y.
From when to when? 30 to 34 is Gen Y?
No, it's not 30 to 34. So from my belief, I think if you're born, I think it's around 1980 to 2000, you're a Gen Y. Again, I could be wrong, but I know.
But that would not make you a millennial then, because you were born in that period of time. So that's good. Let's figure out what is Gen Y and what's millennial. Let's differentiate here.
They're the same.
Oh, they are. Didn't know that.
Yes, you have Gen Y, millennial, then you have the Gen Xer, and then you have the boomer.
So Y and millennial are the same. See, why did I miss that up? Okay, so Xers, what about them? They got a whole group of people in there. They're in their late 40s, mid 30s. Are they going to do something before we get to the millennials?
No. From my perspective, and this is where I think a lot of organizations, companies struggle, is because they forget about the Gen Xers. You have millennials, you have all this talk. Like the sexy thing to talk about is the millennial stereotype, right? Like you look on LinkedIn, you looked on Twitter, Facebook, all these articles on Inc. and everything else are about millennial stereotypes. Now, it's a challenge, it's a problem, but at the end of the day, it comes down to, that's why I don't buy into a lot of these stereotypes, Keenan. But I guess just to, I don't want to go off on that tangent because you'll see me get heated up, but ultimately it comes down to understanding how today's young professionals, how they need to be led, and I think the Gen Xers play probably a more critical role in that than even the Boomers, because it's those Gen Xers that are going to be taking over those leadership positions, ownership positions in the company.
All right, so here's so let's talk about this. Let's just assume, generally speaking, that age plays a role in leadership. Not in leading, but in leadership. So if you look at a bell curve, there's a whole bunch of 20-somethings who are CEOs, but when you compare that to all the 20-somethings, that's a small sliver, right? But then as they get into their 30s and early 40s, there'll be more in leadership roles, and it'll be starting to move up to the top of the curve. But I think they say somewhere around 45 is when you have the biggest amount of a group of people that become leaders, right? Yep. And then as they get older and older, it starts to fade out. So if we do this bell curve thing, right, the argument that millennials are going to be the leaders isn't probably going to be the majority of the leaders, isn't going to be for another about 20 years, okay? Because the Gen Xers are coming in. On the bell curve, there'll be some along the way, right?
Well, can I read a stat, just one stat for you?
Yes. What
you're saying is true, but I pulled this from Ernst & Young, and they said in the last 5 years, 87% of millennial workers took on management roles. Now, that might not be like CEO roles, but at least management roles. So that's already happening. They're already taking on leadership roles.
Yes, and I don't know how that stat would compare to other generations. Like, in other words, when I was in school and I was the team lead for didn't work for McDonald's, but if I did, the team lead for McDonald's, would that count? So I'm just thinking the leader across the bigger company, right? The one setting strategy, setting direction, right?
Yeah.
It's going to be around 45. Here's my question on this. Is there really a group of people, whether it's the Boomers, the Gen X, the Millennials, Gen Y, that stays the same, or are we always having the same conversation about young people? This is really just about young people, because I have been really, Facebook has enlightened me on this one, I have been really completely and utterly depressed with the baby boomers and their closed-minded, their stodgy, conservative, stuck in their ways. And this is the same group of fucking hippies that ran around with the sexual revolution doing LSD and smoking fucking dope. And now these clowns are running the company with sticks up their ass. Right? So is it really about a generation, or is it more about age?
You can probably relate to this better than I do, but when you get older, I feel like you become more set in your ways, regardless of what generation you're a part of.
But you also shift. So there's a difference between set in your ways, using the logic. I'm the wrong person to act because I still act like I'm freaking 25 and I'm 48, right? Or 47, right? So, but it's not just stuck in your ways, because again, notice this. If you look at the older generation, the boomers, they're not the most, this is not some super liberal group. A lot of people argue in some ways that that is the most conservative group. But yet, these were the people listening to Jimi Hendrix, doing Woodstock, smoking dope, LSD, free sex, and even into the early 70s and late 70s with Studio 54 and all of that. This is that group. And now they're the ones who are the most conservative in this country. So I don't even say they're stuck in their ways. Something happens, right? Isn't it more about age than it really is about a group of people and being young, and millennials are this new, right? I don't know. You tell me.
I don't know if I can. If I was 80, I could probably tell you. I mean, I can't, like, I'm not one of those guys, Keenan, to, like, think I have all the answers. I don't, man. But you bring up a good point. I look at that, and I think regardless of age, if you're a young professional of any generation, you have less responsibility maybe, and so you're going to be more open to trying different things. But when you get older, you know, you got family, you have kids, you're maybe less risk adverse. You're not going to, you know, take that risk to start your own company or try different things. I mean, maybe that's the topic of discussion.
So you're sort of suggest. Oh yes, Kiki.
I was just thinking, I think maybe there is a general bell curve, let's just say, but the rate of change that's taken place from, I guess, our grandparents' generation to, yes, there was a lot of social change, but now, I mean, it's global change. It's the rate of change that's happened. So maybe, I don't know. It's same with Blake, just hypothesizing.
It seems clear to me something happens, because and Blake, just as someone who's an expert in this field, and I'm sure companies come to you and they're looking for direction and they're looking for insight, I think your ability to maybe spend a little time reading about the baby boomers and what happened from like 1955 to 1978 and what this country went through, and the level of and how people and the social mindset was. I mean, they were tearing down a lot in that period of time. They were tearing down some very strict, hierarchical, white male-centered systems, right? Not just with civil rights, but also with women, with sex. The idea that on TV they had two beds, and I love on certain movies because the husband and wife couldn't even sleep in the same bed, right? This was a very strict world they tore down. So if one were to close their eyes and look at that group in, let's say, 1971, for simplicity's sake, and say, how do you think they would run this country in 45 years? Nobody would guess they would run it as conservatively and as backward as they're running it today. Mm-hmm. So something happened, you know, on the way, what's that phrase, on the way to the store, on the way something happened.
The 80s and the 90s where the stock market was going up and they all made a shit ton of money, and then your tax, you have a mind shift there.
Well, Keenan, maybe it goes back to what we were talking about before we jumped on, the whole idea of fear. I mean, if you're a young professional, you kind of don't know what you don't know. And while everyone has fear, I think you're going to be more willing, you have more energy to put yourself out there into the unknown, where if you've got some experience, if you've got some years, you've seen a lot of stuff happen. You've seen the ups and downs. And so the idea of how do these boomers go from being very open maybe to what like millennials are considered today to being very conservative goes back to that point of fear. It's just not everyone's like you in a sense where they can keep that fresh young mentality of always pushing, always taking risks, always growing. They kind of get in that position where they're scared to take those risks, more scared than they were when they were younger, and so they become more conservative.
I like that answer. It was a good answer. It's golf clap. Well done. I think fear does play a big role in that. All right, so let's shift the conversation a little. I'd like you to give some advice to any millennials who are listening. So, what would you say to millennials, or what do you say in these programs to help them maximize their ability to be successful, to help them get to where they want to go, and help them be successful? What advice do you give them? What do you say to them?
I mean, first I learned one thing. I can't tell them anything because ultimately they're the ones who are going to make the decision for themselves. And so how I communicate, how I connect with them on that level comes down to giving them the information that goes against maybe what others are teaching them that I've found to be true, that's worked for my career. And this comes down to kind of that process I shared with you in the beginning. You know, if we're going to spend the majority of our lives working, we, instead of focusing on a desired outcome, you know, something we want to achieve in the future, we've got to deliberately and consciously focus on skill development. We've got to develop skills, whether it be sales skills, which from my perspective, everyone's in sales. I don't care what position you're in. If you learn how to sell, for one, you could really do anything you want, but you'll always be employable. But it comes down to developing the skills that you need to succeed in your career. And so the coursework, what I recommend, what we talk about in our chapter meetings, comes down to, all right, what are those skills? And we've defined them out. So we have sales, leadership, adverse management, personal branding, vision, core beliefs, values, things like that we teach. But the second aspect of it is surround yourself with peers that hold themselves to a higher standard in their careers, because they're going to pull you up in your career. And so that's the two pillars of YoungPro Elite. That's what we preach. And when you have someone by your side who is going through the same thing you're going through, but is also trying to get to the same level you're trying to get to, all of a sudden something happens where it's no longer, how am I going to figure this out by myself? It's, how do we achieve this together? And that enables you, to give you an example, the first 10 members that went through the program, every single one of them either got a raise, started their own company, or left the company that they hated working at and got a better job, just because the standard of the peer group was much higher than they've ever been a part of.
Okay, the last one, we lost you again. And either got a raise, they started a company, or they left the company
and went to so they left a company they hated, they left a job they hated, and got another position that now is, I don't want to never say it's their dream job, but it's a position that they wanted since they graduated from college. A position where work is now what they always imagined it to be.
Okay. So then, to synthesize, you tell millennials that to create the life that they want, to create the success they want, they have to focus on the skills, leadership, branding. What were the other ones?
Most important to them. If sales is at the top of the list, then identify what those unique skills are. That's going to set you apart from everyone else. Identify the skills that are going to make you the best at what you do. Because when that happens, you become indispensable. You become in demand, and your career becomes much more fulfilling, because if you're good at doing something, you're going to enjoy it.
So you're a fan of Carol Dweck, then?
Yeah. So the growth mindset, right?
Yes. Mastery orientation, yes.
Yeah. Well, and I just find that to be a much more effective strategy than jumping from job to job with the hope that you're just going to find something or stumble upon something, and then all of a sudden your career is going to be set. Because at the end of the day, you've got to be adding value to other people. And when you look at the needs we were talking about, the needs at the top of the cairn that I have were contribution and significance. And I think anyone who has a rewarding, fulfilling career, they achieve those two needs on a consistent basis.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right, so I like that. Good advice. Millennials, if you're listening, here, Blake. Now, I want to flip it to businesses, right? So one of the things I feel most challenged with, and I don't even think this is a millennial issue, although I've seen it more with millennials, is, and you even talk about it, you say, you talk about this idea of millennials needing development, needing direction, needing growth. I talk about just the opposite in my book, right? There's one particular case, I know we're talking microcosms, but I don't have time to hold anybody's hand, right? I have time to develop you, like let's think of a football team. Let's create an analogy, football team. If I got a kid that comes on the football team and he's running as hard as he can and he's trying to make tackles and he's trying to pick it up and I'm seeing that he's making mistakes, but he knows what he's supposed to do and he's trying to do it, I can coach that up. What I, excuse me, what I don't have time for and what I'm not okay with is this kid comes on the field and he may be the fastest kid in the best. He has no idea. He just stands there saying, well, what do you want me to do? Well, I want you to tackle that guy. So all he does is tackle the guy. And so all of a sudden, someone throws a pass, and he's like, well, now what do I do? Well, I can't give you a paint by numbers. And I actually had one employee who literally looked me in the eye and said, tell me exactly what you need me to do. And I was like, I don't have time for that. I need people that can think for themselves. So how do you balance the two? How do you help companies like me who feel that far too often, particularly the young people, they don't know how to chase goals. They don't know how to set goals. They just wait and say, okay, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do?
Put them in YoungPro Elite. No.
Good. All right, that's a start. We know who to send to him, don't we?
In all reality, you bring up, let's go back to your childhood story of you just figuring stuff out on your own. You were different in that sense where you have that ability. Now, if you have a young professional like that, what I find is through my work with companies, you're going to have some people like that. You're not going to, others aren't going to be like that. But what I think you have to have is you've at least got to have an outline. You've got to provide them with direction. If you as a business owner go into it with the expectation that you're going to hire someone and then you just want them to just figure it out for themselves, well then however many people you hire, I guess one might succeed. The majority of people aren't hired that way. So what I'd recommend is it comes, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you do a lot of sales training with other organizations, right?
Sales coaching, but yes,
Sales coaching. And so I've got to imagine you at least provide them with some direction, some insights, an outline, something they follow, a process, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so,
yes.
Like,
so
process might be the best word.
Okay.
So, like, if you take a process that enables them to follow it on a consistent basis, then if they are still coming back to you saying, what do I do next? Well, then the fact of the matter is that could be a wrong hire for your company. But if you don't provide them with a process from the beginning, then from my perspective, I feel like leadership's at fault. Because if you hire a young professional with the expectation that they're just going to figure it out for themselves, it's almost like you're setting yourself up to fail.
Okay. So let's think about that, right? So I agree with the process, but to me a process is the bad metaphor, but I can work with it, or analogy. Process is the bricks, okay? The creative thinking is the mortar. So I say we have to build a wall, okay? We have to build a wall because we have to keep the kids' ball from going into the neighbor's yard. That's why I have to build a wall, okay? If I have people that just run, and here are the bricks, and they start just putting the bricks up, and then they stop at 3 feet and say, here's the wall, that hasn't done me any good, right? Number one, there's no mortar, so the wall just falls over, so no one thought, well, how do we secure this? Number two, no one said, well, how old are the kids? How well can they throw the ball? How high does the wall have to be? And if I have to say everything in this metaphor, use this much mortar, use these many bricks, make it 27 feet high, et cetera, I might as well just do it myself.
But how long would it take you? How long would it take you to build that wall by yourself?
Probably as much time as it takes me to figure out. Okay, half as much time. But then why do I need foot soldiers? It's just I don't need people to do stuff. And what we want, now I'm on a tangent, sorry, peeps, is I want someone to come to me and say, hey, Keenan, we could accomplish this without a wall. Right? Here's another way to do it. But too many people come to the table and say, how big is the wall supposed to be? When do you need it done? And they don't want to think for themselves. Mm-hmm. And I think I see more and more with young people, and that drives me freaking insane.
So one of the principles in that development forum we talked about was collaboration. And so the companies, the leaders who are most successful in getting their young professionals to create solutions are the ones who will have meetings with their young talent saying, look, we don't have all the answers. How would you do this? Now, there's got to be some level of trust, that they're going to provide the right answer. Now, they could have the right answer in their head, but at the end of the day, I think they've got to be open to saying, all right, what are your insights on this? How would you build this wall? Walk me through it. Because what happens is they then start to take ownership of that initiative. And when they have ownership of the initiative, and I'm making kind of an assumption here, but when you own something, you care about the outcome. And so you become very creative about thinking of all the options. And so I think it's on leadership to, one, have that level of contribution, but give them the ownership. And then more importantly, they have to hold them accountable for those outcomes. Because if they take ownership, they know what they have to achieve. And if they don't achieve it, it's like reverse performance management. You said, all right, guys, you told me exactly what you were going to do to create that outcome. You didn't do it. What happened? It's on the young professionals, and they have to come up with a solution.
I love that. Kiki, does that sound familiar to you in any way, shape, or form?
Yes.
That was really good. I don't think most companies do that.
No, they don't. Well, it requires effort. They just want to provide direction or not provide direction, but at the end of the day, the companies who do the best jobs of leading their young talent take that time to invest, but also to collaborate. And for the business owners who may say, well, I don't have time to collaborate. Well, I mean, how much time do you have to go out and hire more young professionals? How much money do you have to hire more young professionals? Because what's going to happen is they're just going to leave your organization if that time isn't invested.
Where would you say the line is? Because I'm agreeing with everything you're saying here. Where do you think the line is between the responsibility of organizations and the responsibility of the young millennial, the young leader, right? Because really, if we break this whole conversation down, that's what we're talking about, right? The level of responsibility and ownership between the organization to develop their young leaders and provide them support necessary to be successful, and the individual and private ownership of the millennial to actually take advantage of these things, take ownership, and deliver. Where is that line, do you think?
From my perspective, I think ownership has the responsibility to, one, define a clear outcome for their young talent. What I find is that when you don't have an outcome, when you don't know where you're going, and you don't know the why behind it, the importance behind what you do, you get lost. Your efforts become scattered, you don't produce results, and you just get discouraged. Okay. So from my perspective, because ownership, you're going to have these boomers, you're going to have the Gen Xers, they have more experience. They know what needs to get done. They've got to provide that guidance. But here's the thing. Ultimately, I don't think you can micromanage today's young professionals. You can't micromanage anyone. It's just going to drive you crazy. So from my experience, you provide the process, you provide the outcome, you then hold your young talent accountable. You have to hold them accountable. If they don't, and that goes back to the issue of entitlement. You know, you have young professionals today thinking that they deserve certain positions or certain raises. But from my perspective, that issue comes down to a lack of clarity on what it takes to achieve those positions, those raises. And that comes back to leadership. But if you clearly define, all right, if you want that, here's what you have to accomplish. I don't care about tenure. I don't care about age. It doesn't matter how many years you've been in the company to become a leader. If you accomplish this, you will get that. And that automatically squashes that whole idea of entitlement.
I like that. I like that. Nice. Good call. All right. So in the last few minutes, I'm going to do a couple things. I want you to tell me how you I'm going to read out some statistics. I want you, in a sentence or two, tell me how you think that affects the workplace, the millennial, or society. Okay? Over 85% of millennials own a smartphone.
Staying engaged through text messages. In other words, from my perspective, I think leaders, if they're engaging with their young talent throughout the day through text, first, there's an organization out, sorry, you asked for one sentence. Here's the thing, that comes down to, I'll keep it to one sentence. I think it's engaging through text message for the purpose of connection and clarity. So in other words, you can send off a very quick text to a young professional, to a millennial, who is always going to be looking at their phone, and if they know that the leader of that company sent that message, then they're thinking about them. Just that idea of the leader thinking about them means that they care.
Okay, all right. So what's the impact of this next one? 56% of millennials won't accept jobs from companies that ban social media.
The companies that aren't willing to change their ways, I mean, they're going to go out of business.
Okay, okay. 89% of millennials would prefer to choose when and where they work rather than being placed in a 9-to-5 position.
Those who provide their, okay, here's thought, results over hours. In other words, I don't care what hours you work or where you work from. If you produce the results, that's the only thing that matters.
Kiki, why are you laughing so hard?
Because that's like everything he's saying is your mottos. It resonates, Blake.
Yeah, I know this guy who wrote this book that comes out soon. He had a whole chapter on time versus results. Now, who was that guy? Okay, this is an interesting one. 90% of millennials surveyed think being an entrepreneur means having a certain mindset rather than starting a company.
I agree. I think any entrepreneur who succeeds has a certain mindset, a certain mentality.
Yeah, okay. All right, we won't delve too far into it. Here, tell me the impact of this one. 41% of millennials struggle with information overload.
Lack of confidence in themselves. I think they rely so heavily on other peers' perspectives that they don't go with their gut or intuition. And so they keep researching, they keep consuming information, and they make decisions that might not be best for them.
Okay, so good. I like the answer. So I'm going to push you, lean on you a little. For the next couple, give me the impact, not the interpretation, right? So think about this, right? I love the interpretations, but the impact really leads us to focus on the outcome, right? What's your perceived?
I was off target.
Okay, so okay, 51% can't go more than 3 hours without checking their phone.
Focus. I'd say it comes down to switching back and forth between tasks, multitasking, leaders having to deal with that challenge, that issue, and finding ways where they create strategies where it's block time, meaning 45 minutes you focus on this initiative, and then you go back into whatever it is you got to check on your phone.
48% impact. 48% of millennials say word of mouth influences their product purchases more than TV ads.
The importance of referrals in business. I think referrals have always been important, but the fact that peer feedback is at the level it is today with millennials, I think it raises it to a whole other level in terms of experiences businesses provide their customers with. More memorable experiences, the more word of mouth is going to get out there, greater success in the future.
Okay, last one, impact. Millennials are twice as likely to leave their job after 3 years than 30-somethings.
I see it as an opportunity. Well, the impact is the companies who can't retain their young talent are not going to be able to successfully perpetuate their companies in the future. But the opportunity is those who know how to effectively attract, engage millennials are, and from my perspective, the right development, they're going to dominate their industry.
Okay. All right, Blake, my man, we have hit the magic hour. I want to thank you so much for coming on. Love this. Really good conversation with millennials. I think we could talk for hours and hours about it, dig into some of the root causes. My takeaway is millennials have a unique perspective and a unique way of moving through the world. They provide tremendous value, and it's incumbent upon businesses to be aware of those unique elements and build structures and systems and environments and processes to capitalize on those. And that it's incumbent upon millennials to recognize that they are part of the bigger system and not just young people, and figure out how they can capitalize on those systems and processes and environments and organizations create to help them be successful. Is that a good synopsis?
Great synopsis.
All right, my man. This was a pleasure. Kiki, you want to add anything before we jet?
Other than that, if you want to find Blake, I have all of his he has a lot of resources on his website. You should really check it out, especially if you're a millennial trying to develop your own self and step up your game, be the top in your industry. Check that out because you are expanding, correct, Blake?
Yeah. I mean, we're across North America right now, and in 2016 we'll have close to 100 chapters. So here's the thing. If I can say one thing, Keenan,
you can say anything you want
today. I want to thank you, Kiki, as well, because I know you set this all up. But for a lot of young professionals today, from my perspective, finding people like you who stay true to what you do, and it's why Not Taught will be required reading for all of our chapters here in the future. Just being authentic to who you are, what you do, what you want out of life is critical. And so sharing the word, spreading the word, everything you both are doing here, I can't thank you guys enough because I feel like it's your actions that are kind of setting the standard for, you know, the millennials, and that goes a long way, so thank you.
Well, come on, man. He's the most humble guy. He's like the nicest guy in the entire world. He makes people like me look like jerks. And he's so nice and thoughtful and humble and appreciative, and you know. And then my ornery ass is, it's crazy. But look, man, it is my pleasure. It is my pleasure.
Sure, we should.
Absolutely enjoyed having you. Go, Keek.
I think we should do a Colorado meetup.
We will. Yeah. And we'll get you guys involved because we're starting different chapters, and we're even partnering up with local universities. So yeah, we'll find a way to work together.
I love that, and we'll have to cheesy plug, humble brag. Everything you said, and you're the early reader. I want to thank you, Blake, for being an early reader. I put out my book, Not Taught, for early readers, and Blake was the first one to request and the first one to finish it and the first one to offer me a review, so that was phenomenal. But it sounds like a lot of young millennials could use that as well, so let's figure out a way we can get that in their hands.
That's in the showcase. Underneath all of Blake's links will be a link to pre-order Not Taught if you're interested.
Ooh, all right. Blake, my man, have fun on your next hike with your dog. What's your dog's name?
Rocky.
Rocky, oh, how fitting. Rocky, keep the pictures coming because you always look like you're in the middle of absolutely freaking nowhere, so it's sweet. So enjoy, my man. Thank you so much for coming on. Really enjoyed it. Good stuff, good insight, and keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you, Keenan. Thank you, Kiki. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Kiki, are we all set, sister?
We sure are.
All right, yo, peace, people. I'm out.
So just chill till the next episode.